Welcome back, Honors. All right, so again, throwing it out there again like I did just at the very beginning of the video. Make sure that you are paying close attention to this flip. Not muting, not skipping through, not skimming, none of that shenanigans, all right? Only just to say because this next flip seems really out of place, all right? So it seems like really off the wall. It seems like it doesn't really apply to the things that we're talking about because we just were talking about the medieval Catholic Church. Now we're moving into another country popping up out of nowhere, right? So this is just to understand and take it a little bit further that we're still looking at like the Middle Ages in terms of the rising identity of Western Europe, right? We're looking at the ideas of France popping up and then Germany eventually, but as of right now, Germany is known as the Holy Roman Empire. We're then looking up as like the Byzantine has been established, etc., etc., etc. Now, when you're looking though at the Middle Ages in totality, you gotta understand that in the modern era of European history and European like economic and governmental ideology, right? You're talking about, you got a lot of powerful countries. Germany is a powerful country to this day, right? France is a powerful country. And then also there's one though that's not on this map, that's not colored in, that doesn't have anything for them. And that group is England, right? England didn't exist yet, all right? If you ask most people, if you walk into a pub or a restaurant or a like random place in England, right? Almost every single English person will tell you that they know of or understand the importance of the year 1066, right? And we are moving towards the importance of that year, right? You are going to need to know 4 different dates for this test, right? The fall of Rome, the date we're about to talk about with 1066, the signing of the Magna Carta, yay, in 1215, and then you're going to need to know the fall of Constantinople in 1453, okay? So make sure you know those dates. They are a fill-in-the-blank question. Also, the reason why you need to make sure you're paying attention is because this section is heavily referenced in the fill-in-the-blank section and in the matching multiple choice and in the matching section and in the blah, 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 blah. All right, but let's talk about it. So the English and England has their roots set and cemented into the earliest parts of the Middle Ages, right? England was originally settled by 2 groups of barbarians, the Angles and the Saxons, right? And they were divided into 2 separate kingdoms, right? The English Angles and the English Saxons, right? You gotta understand that each had their own laws, each had their own customs, and these 2 different entities would sometimes end up going to war with each other, right? So looking at this though, okay, it was invaded in the 400s, and this is actually when it was originally owned by the Romans, right? And so going into it, okay, the Angles and the Saxons eventually pushed the Romans out. They pushed them beneath Hadrian's wall that was built there, and they eventually expel them out of England, right? And they take the British Isles, or the Britons, right? So now, big thing and important thing to understand is the Angles and the Saxons came from the areas of what you would say about modern-day Denmark, right? Modern-day Holy Roman Empire, and they established 2 separate areas, the Angles and the Saxons. Now, this is in the 400 to 500 year range, right? When Rome is still a thing. When Rome existed, the Angles and the Saxons invaded the island of Britain, and they actually established 2 kingdoms, right? Now, as things go forward, though, getting further into it, about a couple hundred years later, England is going to start being subject to a lot of Viking invasions, right? Frequent Viking invasions. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that they are very close to the Viking home territory, right? Norway, Denmark, Sweden, those areas are where the Vikings are from, right? They were subject to frequent Viking invasions because they were so close to them, right? And actually, in Linsfarna, that the big event that marks the beginning of the Viking era, Linsfarna is in England, right? So now England, because they're so subject to this, there will then rise the first true, like, king of what you would call England, in a sense, right? So what ends up happening is a man rises up by the name of Alfred the Great, right? Alfred the Great rises up. He is a Saxon king, and he unites the Angles and the Saxons together to stop these Viking invasions, right? Hence why you are sometimes referred to, or why some people who are descendant of the English are referred to as Anglo-Saxon, right? So he took the 2 Angles and the Saxons, merged them together, and created an Anglo-Saxon kingdom of the Isle of Britain, right? We're still not quite England yet, though, right? Okay, we're still not quite what you would call the English. But just so you understand, that's where the word comes from. The word England is associated with the land of the Angles, right? So the Angles were from this area, or they colonized this area, and then they were referred to as Angleland, hence why it would then be later referred to as England, right? So this has a lot of history integrated into their island, and Alfred the Great's a big player. He is in your matching section. He is only referenced that one time, though, okay? So just so you know, Alfred the Great, right? Alfred the Great is going to unify the Angles and the Saxons together into the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to defend themselves against Viking invasion, right? So with that, though, now you've got a joint kingdom, right? Now you have a kingdom made up of Angles and Saxons inside of England, and this is in the late 800s AD, okay? And since he was the first king of what you would call England, right, you then are going to see his descendants take over, right? His son, and then that son's son, and they're going to continue to pass it down through this dynasty, right? Now, interestingly enough, though, some of you have probably heard of his great-grandson, right? His great-grandson is known as King Edward, right? So, now, big thing, though, okay, it's like the great-great-grandson. The great-great-grandson of King Alfred the Great was a man by the name of King Edward. Now, King Edward, and again, this is important to listen to, okay? King Edward was a very pious man, right? He was very, very religious. He actually at one point wanted to be a monk, but unfortunately, since he had to rise to power and become king, that wasn't possible, right? He ends up getting married, but the issue is because he's so pious and because he's so into his religion, he never has children, right? So King Edward was so pious, was so intense, was so about his faith that they gave him a nickname, and they called him King Edward the Confessor, right? So King Edward the Confessor, like the grammar school in our area, that is actually a real person, and Edward the Confessor is right here. But here's the interesting thing. In 1065, King Edward the Confessor dies. And when he dies, he doesn't have an heir to the throne, but two people make a claim for it, right? This happens all the time in medieval history, right? So King Edward the Confessor dies, and two individuals make a claim at it, right? Now, the first one is this dude, Harold Godwinson, son of Godwin, one of Edward's closest advisors, right? So King Edward the Confessor had a huge panel of advisors, much like the Mayor of the Palace situation, had a huge panel of advisors that would help him out. One of them was known as Godwin, and Godwin was the biggest landholder in all of England, and he was very close with the king. So the English people, the Anglo-Saxon people, were like, oh, well, Harold should be our next king. And they actually did, for a moment, crown Harold Godwinson the King of England. But across the English Channel, right over here in what is Normandy, right? See, this is Normandy right here. It's in northern France. Notice how close it is to England right there. So Normandy is right here. There was a man there that said, no! King Edward said that I was supposed to be king, right? And he was promised the kingship by Edward, also by this man's father, Godwin, right? So, the big thing about it is William of Normandy says, no, I am the biggest landholder in northern France. I am William of Normandy, and I demand my chance to be king of this new country, right? Because he was sick and tired of being just a noble in France, right? He was like, I have a chance to become what is known as the king of this new place called England, right? Well, not yet. It's still called the Anglo-Saxon kingdom, right? So what ends up happening when two people claim power over the throne, there ends up being a massive battle, right? And in 1066, King Harold Godwinson squares off against William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings, right? And at the Battle of Hastings, this huge battle breaks out, right? And it's a conflict over who's going to be king, okay? Now, here's an interesting part. I need you to write this down, okay? Harold's army was ridiculously weak, right? Why were they so weak? Harold was the king of England at this point, right? He was the king of England, and he was like, oh, I've been crowned the England, blah, 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 blah. But the interesting part about this whole thing is that William of Normandy wasn't the only guy that claimed the throne. What ended up happening, actually, is King Harthencourt from Norway was also like, oh, no, I want to be king of England. So there were actually 3 guys that claimed the right to the throne, right? And so since Harthencourt invaded up in northern England, Harold had to go up there and fight him first, right? He goes all the way up and he fights King Harthencourt and he ends up beating the King of Norway in this battle, but then he finds out that William of Normandy has just landed on the shores at the southern area of England, so he has to march his army all the way back down there, and by the time they get there, his army is exhausted, depleted, and half of them are already dead, right? So, like, interestingly enough, he gets down there and William is going to end up winning this battle to become king of England because Harold Godwinson dies in the Battle of Hastings, right? So remember, Harold had a very weak army because he had to go all the way up to the northern area of England, fight off King Harthencourt of Norway, and then come all the way back down and fight off William of Normandy, and he ends up losing, right? And he ends up losing the battle, and he dies at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 because he got shot in the eye with an arrow, right? So unlike Harold's army, William of Normandy showed up in England with a huge contingent of unfettered and unmessed up armed forces, and he had a huge division of archers, right? And the archers let off crossbow shots, and he ended up getting shot in the eye with the arrow. The arrow went straight into his brain and killed him, right? And so since that happened, now William of Normandy is going to become King of England. So the Battle of Hastings is really important because it intertwines the politics and the kingship of France and England now, right? Because here's the interesting part. William is going to be renamed William the Conqueror, and he is going to begin to centralize power, and he is going to claim all the land in England as his own, and he's going to give lands to his supporters, right? So he actually is going to reshape England completely. He strips it from the nobles that are there, and he gives it to the nobles that support him, right? So King William of England, right? William the Conqueror, very important figure to understand, all right? Now, here's a big impact. Listen closely. You don't have to write it down, but you do need to remember it. When William invaded England, one of the biggest results of this is going to be the fact that English, the way we speak it now, is going to be forever changed, all right? When William of Normandy invades England, he didn't speak the language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons, which was Anglish, right? So he spoke French. So actually, when William was crowned William the Conqueror and William I of England, right, he actually emerged out of the church after being crowned by the English people. And the English people were excited. They were actually happy because a lot of them were like, oh, if he strips all the land from the nobles now, a bunch of us will be freed and we won't have to be serfs anymore. And we kind of move around and then we can decide to become a serf somewhere else if we want to, right? And so the English people were so happy that when he came out of the church, they were like, yay, hooray, William. But since he couldn't speak English, he was like, they sound mad. Get him. And he took his army and sicked it on them, right? And they ended up burning down half of the city of London at the time, right? So, and he was actually coronated, and this is on Christmas Day, right? Christmas Day in 1066, William the Conqueror burned down half the city of London because he thought a crowd was yelling at him, right? So, but interestingly enough, though, since he spoke French and they spoke English, he tried to learn how to speak English to speak to them. They tried to learn how to speak French to speak to him. And what happened is the English language and the French language melded together, and it's where we get the modern day language of English. What I'm speaking now is a product of William of Normandy invading England, right? And so since he began to centralize power, then there's a stroke of genius. Then William of Normandy says, I'm going to become the conqueror, not only of this land, but also of its money. And he writes this thing known as the Doomsday Book. Highlight it, circle it, star it, underline it. It is a fill-in-the-blank question, okay? The Doomsday Book, spelt, I know, the Doomsday Book, is a survey of every person that was living in England when he took power. It was a survey of what they owned, how much they could pay in taxes, and was used to create an efficient tax system, right? So William of Normandy taking over England, right, and creating the modern-day country of England, because it was Angleland, or the land of the Angles, and when he takes it over, it gets anglicized into England, right? He has now created an efficient tax system, centralized power under one leader, and he basically creates the King of England and the country of England, right? And interestingly enough, this right here is the only living record of the Battle of Hastings, and it is known as the Bayeux Tapestry. There it is. So Since no one could read and write for the predominant amount in the Anglo-Saxon areas when he actually took over, the only thing that we have that actually records this event is a tapestry, which is literally a sewing and embroidered cloth that shows the Normans taking over England in 1066, right? That is the conquest of England by the Norman invaders, and that is William of Normandy in a nutshell. And that was your really short flip for this evening. But I'll see you guys later. Tomorrow we're going to start talking about the Crusades. I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.